Okay, hello Bio2, we're continuing on with Cnidarians today. Remember the last video ended discussing the body plan of Cnidarian. So now we're going to get into how they carry out those things that actually define, make things what they are, living things. So we're going to go into how they feed, because all living things, in order to be considered an animal, have to feed. So in feeding, the Cnidarian will pull its food through its mouth and into its gastrovascular cavity, which we mentioned before, which is the big opening, which is just a digestive chamber with one opening. And food enters and waste leaves the body through that same opening. So they only have one hole, food comes in and waste goes out, kind of all in the same spot there. So we might consider that gross, but they don't even notice it. That's all they know. And then the digestion that occurs in the gastrovascular cavity is going to be what is known as extracellular, meaning that it takes place outside of cells. So it's literally just held in there and digested outside of the cells. Then our partially digested food is absorbed by the gastroderm, and then that digestion is completed intracellularly, which means within the cells in the gastroderm. And then any materials that cannot be digested are passed out of the body through the mouth. So they digest their food partially outside of their cells. Then after they get it into a form their cells can use, their cells will take it in. So extracellularly and intracellularly is the fancy way of saying that. So respiration, circulation, and excretion, again, they have to do all these things in order to be considered an animal. So following digestion, nutrients are usually transported throughout the body by diffusion. So they just kind of travel from areas of high concentration to low concentration. So where they have a lot, then it goes to where there's not a lot. And then the Cnidarians respire and eliminate the waste of cellular metabolism by diffusion through their body walls. So if you remember, there's always going to be byproducts from our cells kind of trying to process all of the food and energy, and all of those byproducts will just kind of pass through the body wall of the Cnidarian. They don't have to go back out through the one opening in the gastrovascular cavity, because again, these are just going to be different molecules and things like that the body cannot use. And so our next one is response. So this is going to be how Cnidarians gather information, and this is going to be more specialized than our last group, the sponges. And they can gather information from their environment using specialized sensory cells. So they do have some cells that help them sense the environment. Both polyps and medusas have what's called a nerve net, and this is a loosely organized network of nerve cells. So this is a very early brain, if you will. So a brain is a very tightly condensed, organized network of nerve cells, where in this they have what's known as a nerve net, which is a loosely organized network of nerve cells. So it's not quite a brain, but we're kind of getting more advanced, more evolved, to where it could start becoming a brain. And so some of those specialized cells that I mentioned before that kind of go into this nerve net would be what's known as a statocyst. This is one, and these are groups of sensory cells that help determine the direction of gravity. So it's basically so these Cnidarians can tell the difference between up and down, basically, so they know where they're going and how they're traveling. So that's one type of those cells that will kind of go into making up that nerve net. The other will be ocelli, and these are going to be eye spots, and these are made of cells that detect light. So they actually do have cells that will help them detect light and either help them travel towards it or away from it, depending on what their needs are at that time. And a movement in this, again, which movement is technically a requirement to be an animal, but there are some exceptions for the rule, if you remember. So sea anemones have what's called a hydrostatic skeleton, and this consists of a layer of circular muscles and a layer of longitudinal muscles, and with the water in the gastrovascular cavity enable the Cnidarian to move. So it's a layer of muscles going long ways and a circular set, and with the water going through, just kind of moves around and helps them move. So we will explain that more in class. And then reproduction. So most Cnidarians reproduce both sexually and asexually, and their polyps can reproduce asexually by budding. And in most Cnidarians, sexual reproduction takes place with external fertilization, and that means that fertilization takes place outside of the female's body. So this is going to be opposite from the sponges, where fertilization took place inside the female body. And so we're going to look at one jellyfish as an example of this. but there again will be many that follow this similar, if not the exact same pattern. So in the life cycle of Aurelia, which is a common jellyfish, the female releases eggs into the water, and the male releases the sperm. So there is really no contact there. Just the female releases the eggs, male releases the sperm. And fertilization occurs in open water, and each zygote grows into a free-swimming larva. So we can see we have our little larva there. Remember, a larva will look nothing like the adults. It's kind of its own thing. And then the larva eventually attach to a hard surface and develop into a polyp. So again, the polyp, you can see its mouth pointing upwards with the tentacles there, and it's attached to a single spot. And the polyp will eventually bud and release young medusas that begin the cycle again. So again, we started with medusas up here, and then we ended with medusas. So that is it for this one. Let me know if you have any questions.